Hello. Thank you for joining us. I have the privilege of connecting today with Elisa Lutz, registered psychologist here in the general area of Calgary. I know you don't live in Calgary, but Elisa, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Really enjoying the nicer weather we're getting these days.
That's true. Last couple interviews I did similar to this, it was -30 outside. But I was
Right.
still sitting in this lovely atrium, which is, it's not a background, it's real. And so when you come to Masters, when you come to connect with some of our therapists here at the office, you'll have to come down and join the atrium. My name is Matthew. I have the privilege of being a part of the admin team. You call it weird times like late in the afternoon or evening, I should say, or Saturdays or Sundays, I'm probably going to be the person that connects with you. But Elisa, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. Just wanted to introduce you to so many of the people that watch our social media channels. And maybe you're looking to connect with a therapist and you could potentially be that person that they connect with. If you don't mind, I'd love to just jump into some of the questions that we have. And right off the bat, I deal with this a lot when I'm chatting with friends, colleagues, acquaintances, is what are some of the biggest misconceptions about therapy? But because mostly you do a lot of online therapy, what are some of the misconceptions about online therapy? And how do you make sure that virtual sessions are as effective as in-persons?
Right. I think you're right. I think there can be a lot of misconceptions about online therapy, especially if someone hasn't tried it. I think probably the main misconception is just that something is missing. They may or may not be able to even say what that something is, probably just that in-person, face-to-face feature. And there's actually been lots of time now for us to study virtual therapy. The American Psychological Association has actually published information about what they call telehealth. So basically the ability to do therapy at a distance. And what they have found is that they're just as effective, the virtual sessions, as any in-person sessions. And they actually have higher what they call retention rates. So the people who do virtual sessions are more likely to continue coming back.
Really?
We have the statistics now that it's really not missing something in that sense. It's just as effective as the in-person. But as primarily a virtual therapist, what do I do that helps to make it that way? So whenever possible, I do like to have a video component. So very similar to this, like to be able to meet with the person and talk with them where I can see them, because there's still so much information I can gather through this. We can see facial expressions, hand gestures, as I'm doing a lot of, that all tells certain stories. I can see if someone's crying, whether they're, making any noise with that or not, I can see it. So there's a lot that happens in those cues, and we are able to do that. But I think what is really the same though across virtual and in person, it's the ability to form connection and relationship, like a therapeutic alliance is what we would call it. And that can be done at a distance, in person, especially if you have the ability to do video. I'm able to share the same interventions that I could in the same room as a person. I'm able to do the same work, really. It does also have an added layer of flexibility. Sometimes, people can get onto a virtual call after work a little bit faster than they could if they had to drive somewhere. And so it has a layer of flexibility and some convenience. Also, that's sort of a bonus of virtual sessions. So I really think, as much as there can be a bit of misconception about the fact that it's missing something, at the end of the day, it actually holds really many of the same features that in-person therapy has.
Yeah. And I mean, as a mom, you can appreciate the benefit of, if you need to deal with your kids before therapy or quickly after therapy, there's no driving time. There's that, as you mentioned, that flexibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing it does, and this can be for good or for better or worse, but it also means that when it's like cold and flu season, if someone's just not feeling like 100%, but they're still good enough, you can generally keep your appointment rather than having to be concerned about, passing anything on. Although everyone needs to do self-care and sometimes cancellations are important anyways, but it can provide added flexibility in like those areas as well, right? So,
and for those of us I mean, I'm very familiar with therapy, both in person and online. There's days I'll be like, I'm sorry, I can't make it in person. I'm moving it online. I think one of the things is for a lot of people who maybe aren't familiar with the therapy process, I mean, this is what it would look like, right? It'd be a phone call or a Zoom call or a Teams call or something similar to that, where it's you and myself and maybe someone else from my side. A fair statement?
Yes, absolutely. It would look probably almost exactly like this. And really we have to actually I find the like more and more that this is becoming more common. I'm actually finding the programs that we use, I think, are becoming even better than they even used to be a couple years ago. And so like internet connections are really strong. And so we're really able to have very straightforward, easy discussions. And it looks very much like this. So this would be a very good kind of picture of what that might be for someone to expect.
Yeah. And if I could subtly transition to a different question, I do couples counseling. I actually enjoy online better because I can see your face and I can see my wife's face at the same time and see interactions. As a therapist who provides couples counseling, how do you find online therapy works for couples counseling?
I think it works, yeah, much the same, really. And like you said, I mean, because you're able to see, like, as long as the couple can arrange it in a way that they're both visible. And actually, the programs that we use you can do that in one of two ways. You can actually both join in separate places. So, for example, if this were a session and your wife were to join in, she actually could have her own picture and we could all talk with our separate pictures and I'd be able to keep track of both of you, your facial expressions, everything like that. Or you can do it when you're in the same location on a couch or something when you're both able to be visible. But as you mentioned previously, sometimes there's an added flexibility that comes when it comes to couples counseling. And sometimes people will have their kids kind of occupied off to the side, but it can be a lot easier than in past when I've worked with people who've had to find babysitting or childcare or something just to be able to come to couples counseling.
Yeah.
Because if they're both coming, that can sometimes take care of the childcare. So it can provide that flexibility. But yeah, you can see them both. And I think as long as they're both able to be in the visual, it works totally fine as well.
Thank you for that clarification. That's kind of what I meant is my wife will join on a separate device and I can see both the therapist's face, I can see her face, I can see how she responds when I say something or when the therapist says something, I can see facial expressions. And it's actually really helpful because what I didn't realize is that, when I'm in a chair and she's sitting next to me and the therapist across from me or whatever the orientation is, I can't see both angles. So it's been actually really helpful. And one of the things I wanted to transition question-wise is, so you have a pretty significant background in psychology. How has that background of psychology really impacted and changed the way that or added into the way that you approach counseling and therapy?
Right. Yeah. So you're right. It shapes so much, especially for myself, because I'm a registered psychologist. So I mean, psychology and everything involved in that informs, some of the practicals, the rules, the guidelines, all of that to, our counseling practice. But psychology, I think it adds a bit more depth as well. Like I was thinking about this in the sense of, I think without psychology added into our counseling, we wouldn't have the same kind of hope that the things that we do actually work. So it's through psychology and through studying of the brain and everything like that we have found that our brains are flexible, right? There's the official fancy term for it would be neuroplasticity. We have the ability, our brains can make new connections. We can change the way that we think. We can change our habits. And those new connections are really a big part of what our counseling is, whether it's described kind of as such all the time in counseling, but really that's what it is, right? Is it's our brain kind of rearranging the way it thinks and coming up with something new. And I think if we didn't have that, and if we didn't know that was possible, I think a lot of times the work we do in counseling there wouldn't be as much hope to make changes. And so I think it really provides the framework for what we do in counseling and really why it works so well. And also the reason why we're able to explain things to clients and share interventions and kind of be like, if you just stick with me a little bit, we'll form some new habit here. And, you'll be able to see a change to this, right? So just stick with me for a little bit of time and we can we can make these changes. And that really, though it's something we do in counseling, that is all based in psychology. And so I think that's really how it informs and kind of works with the work we do in our counseling.
Yeah, I love that answer. Sometimes our English language lets us down. As a non-therapist, as a non-psychologist, a lot of times when I'm having conversations with people about counseling, I think we get the phrase counseling and wise counsel confused. And what I mean by that is when you think someone's you're getting wise counsel, somebody else is talking at you a lot. Whereas in the counseling process, really the therapist might be posing questions here and there, but really it's the client that's really sharing, and there's revelation that comes through that. I think, and the question is, what are some of the ways that you help draw the wisdom out of an individual, or how do you help them process through what they're going through?
Probably as a professional in this field, this almost feels like it comes out as like too mystical, but there is some magic, it feels like, or
art, it's art, more of an art than a science, maybe.
Right? Yes. And so, I think you're right. A lot of that is in the questions that are asked, because as people start to answer questions and they start to say things out loud, it's amazing the things that they'll say, and then they'll stop and they'll have to think back to what they just said. And there's the answer, right, that they're looking for. So that, I think, is a big part of it, is just listening really to people. A lot of times they know the answer, but maybe they don't know the answer yet. And so it's just by asking certain questions, kind of helping draw certain things to the surface. But there are also, I've kind of mentioned this a few different times already, but like there are interventions as a psychologist that I know are helpful in certain areas. And so I may send someone home to do a reflection, or to do the dreaded homework assignment, but it's not homework. It's like, a specific oriented kind of reflection or something like that, that will help them do something in the middle. And that can bring a fair bit of awareness to their situation, to the things that they're processing. And it can help them think about it a bit differently and realize in the process that they either have the answer, or maybe they actually don't have the answer, but they know the area that they need to work on or to shift in that. And that can also be something that we target through counseling.
I love that. One of the things you actually taught me in one of our previous conversations was the CBT triangle, and how I think a lot of us, it's our behaviors, or like the overwhelming emotions, that are the reasons why we're going to counseling. But really we're trying to get maybe to the root of the issue. In today's society, what do you see as being kind of the fundamental root?
That's a really good question. I would say and this isn't even the root. I would say there's a lot of anxiety that come from various places. And I think everybody's root for that would be different, but that's usually something that is underlying.
So a lot of anxiety out there.
A lot of anxiety. And see, even deeper to that, like as we dig in, there can be trauma that could be a root. There's even different things that have been spoken over a person, where they have created thoughts or feelings about themselves, whether they even know that or not, that's sort of deep buried inside them. And I'm just thinking of some that have come up recently, of like the fear of failure, and they can pop up in different ways. A lot of times these days, it seems like it's coming out through anxious behaviors or thoughts, those sorts of things. Yeah. So maybe that's...
It's great. You're right. Like maybe the anxiety is the root of, but is there more things underneath the anxiety? I guess I have two questions. And the first question is that new? Is the anxiety new, or is it the way it's manifesting? Is that new?
In the length of my career, I would say probably not. Like early in my career, I worked in an agency that did a lot of studying of different things, and they spoke to the fact that at that point in time, so about a decade ago, that anxiety was probably the number one cause that people came to counseling for. Has it been like that prior to us? Because I actually think there's a bit of a generational issue in that. That's how a lot of us grew up. And I think that's a very common underlying feeling for whatever reason. But I think it is possible that it's newer in the fact that maybe it wouldn't have been quite as prevalent 30 to 40 years ago. But at the same time, maybe it was there. And again, as we generally know about with stigmas in mental health, maybe it wasn't talked about, right? So I think that's the question is it new? versus, or is it now just being talked about? You'll have to remind me. I think there was a second question in there.
I actually didn't say it yet. Yeah, it's okay. That's okay. I do have the second question a little bit, but I think we all have that parent or that grandparent that talks about how, oh, this generation is not as resilient, or this generation doesn't know how to handle this stuff. And I'm genuinely interested. I mean, are we actually seeing that as a trend? Does society have less resilience, or are we just putting more stress on ourselves that maybe historically wasn't there?
It's probably, I don't think it's that this generation is lacking resilience. I think resilience is something that human beings have. Noting even as I raise children, they are resilient. There is a level of resilience. But I do think that there are things in our culture, one of them being the pace maybe at which we move, causing stress, causing, just some differences there. And probably some other aspects too that are kind of a part of the current day and age, I think, that lead to maybe a bit more anxiety. So I don't think that we are really less resilient, but there probably are some unique things that are happening in the culture that probably are increasing, that anxiety around us.
Like, for example, tariff threats and stuff like that. Like,
Absolutely.
we wrote an article on the stress that can come from these very large political forces that very much outside of our control. We're at the mercy of it. But how do we control our anxiety? Which leads me to my second question is, so, Lisa, I come to you, I'm a client, and I'm struggling with anxiety. What would be some of the ways that you would look to support me as a client or support a client in that nature?
Well, I think we would do some of that exploration, kind of like we just talked about a couple minutes ago, of where is it coming from? So we would do a bit of kind of digging around where the anxiety is coming from, what is the root of it. And we'd look for that because that will really inform some very key features to the anxiety and how we work with it. And then we build a bit of a plan. And that is something that, I bring sort of the interventions that I have used over the years and the book knowledge, that sort of thing. But my client brings the expert knowledge of their life and what they're needing and how they want to see things resolved in their life and how they would be acting differently if, let's say, anxiety was no longer present. And so we really work together to create a plan of what does that look like and how do we want to target that? And then we can approach it with a number of different interventions, techniques, even, modalities. You've mentioned CBT and the CBT triangle. That's one potential way to address anxiety, but it's not the only way. There are so many others, and many therapists are actually able to use aspects of different modalities in a way that best fits the client. So, we kind of look at what each individual's needs are and create a plan that is specific to them. So it could be by challenging their negative thoughts, kind of like CBT would lend to, or it could be working on helping a person be more present and more aware about what's happening right in front of them, which would be a more mindfulness-based approach as well. So, there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. But like I said, I think it starts with a bit of digging to see where it's coming from, what it is, and then creating a plan for how to help it.
I love that. One of the things I love, and again, this is probably a guy thing, is you talked about solutions. I like solutions. I think a lot of us and a lot of men and women love solutions, but an area where I hear a lot of people, again, when I'm just having conversations as a non-therapist, I'm having conversations and I hear this phrase a lot. I just need to manage my anger. And I know that you've worked with individuals who are struggling with anger and, you hear that phrase. What are some of the common mistakes that people make when managing anger? And what's a better way, or what's a more healthy way of handling that anger?
Well, I think the first thing is that, like, a common mistake with anger is a lot of times people are afraid of it, maybe is a good way to word it. Anger, I think, is one of the only emotions that just automatically is like almost assumed that we shouldn't have it, that it's bad, and, push it away at all costs. And so a lot of times managing anger could be like trying to push it in or bottle things up. And that's where things get not quite so healthy. Now, the reality is that anger is an emotion, just like any other emotion. And that gives us important information about a given situation, about our experience in that situation. And so just because a person is experiencing anger, I would say it's not automatically bad. The emotion isn't automatically bad or anything like that. I think if we can recognize that the emotion itself isn't the problem, but sometimes when we get caught up in an emotion and we behave poorly, we make bad decisions, ill-informed decisions, then sometimes we act in a way that would be deemed bad, let's say, and that's where anger can get a bad rap. And so I think if we were able to first off just see anger as an emotion like any other, I think that's a first step. It could help us to slow down, to work to formulate some calm responses rather than rash reactions, let's say. It kind of, I think, viewing anger just like any other emotion will give us more agency or more power to really work to control it and to manage it, because we want to, just like any other emotion, we want to be able to investigate it, look at it from all sides. And once we do that, we're more easily able to have it not take over. But yeah, then we're not kind of pushing it away or stuffing it somewhere, in which case that will come back and cause us problems later. Right. So I think managing anger is a decent term, but I think a lot of times it is done out of fear. And so we want to make sure that we respect the emotion and understand it, and then create kind of healthy solutions, like I said, based more from a calm perspective.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I've heard it said that anger is like the check engine light in the car. When the check engine light goes off, you don't have a check engine light problem. You have an engine problem. And so, anger is like, it's the indicator that there's something wrong. Then, one of the things you talk about is, where does anger become almost destructive? And, again, in a lot of the work you do with couples, I don't want to generalize, but I do know that there's a lot of anger that does manifest in relationships. It causes damage. How do you help couples navigate dealing with anger, recognizing anger, and then, processing maybe through some of the damage of some of that anger? Heavy topic. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. Well, I think with working with couples, probably anger, I mean, there's some aspects that probably are individual in how they handle anger, but a lot of it's also going to come out in how they communicate with each other. And so I think a lot of times working with couples, we need to look at how their styles of communication and how each person reacts in that anger. First off, if they can just understand a bit about their partner, how their partner reacts or responds, that gives some good information and might avoid different assumptions or concerns that can escalate a situation, I would say, with couples. Like, oh my goodness, he or she just left. Like, they're walking out. What does that mean? And a lot of times the person who's maybe feeling the anger and like left is doing so to salvage the relationship, because they don't want to end up escalating the situation worse. But because of how it's presented or not communicated around, it's received as rejection, or it's received as maybe even more anger than it really is. And so a lot of work with couples is looking at how each person responds, how each person, like what each of those actions means to them, and coming up with a strategy when they're not escalated. That's a lot of, I think, couples work, is coming up with strategies when you're not in the middle of the escalation that they can then use, maybe if they're in a situation where they're a bit angry or where they're navigating through it, they'll understand a bit more about what's going on, and they'll be able to, again, to face it calmly. Like I usually say calm response or rash reaction, right? And so rather than reacting, if they understand a bit about each other, about their anger and how to maybe communicate well, which is hopefully what we can do together in the therapy, but maybe then we can lead them to responding more calmly and in a way that they both understand as they move forward.
I love that example you used. So in this situation, let's just say the husband or partner decides to leave.
Right.
And the potential motivation is, I want to protect my spouse. I know I'm going to get angry. I know as a result, I'm not going to make this environment safe. So I'm going to remove myself. But that message could communicate that sense of rejection. He doesn't want me. He doesn't love me. Where's he going? And how two very different messages are communicated from one single action.
Yes. Time and time again. So that's a big part, I think, of the couples work. It's really working on how one action means something different to different people, and working to understand that.
Yeah. If I could segue the conversation just slightly, one of the things you talk about often is just you love seeing people have that aha moment. And if you don't mind me asking, what's some of your favorite aha moments that you see in counseling with some of your clients?
I think one of my favorite kind of types of aha moments is when a person who wasn't necessarily either interested in counseling or didn't believe it was going to work for them or didn't know what to expect, when they really see good progress and they're able to note how they're doing things differently, that sort of thing. I even have a particular individual who has had kind of some crisis situations in their life, kind of separated by probably about a decade. And the first time they faced a situation, they were not well equipped. They weren't used to talking about their feelings or doing anything with it. They bottled things up, and they can just see how they didn't make healthy choices for themselves at the time. But then over that decade period of time, they've gone to different therapists. They've received various forms of help, and they've really, at the end of the day, learned to open up and to talk. And that's something now in the work that we're doing, they're realizing they're going through another major crisis in their life, but their first reaction was to book an appointment with me rather than go into any self-destructive patterns. And so they're saying, like, wow, this is amazing that even though this situation is horrendous, I'm dealing with it differently than I did a decade ago because therapy helps. I've learned it's important to talk about how I feel. And so I think that is really, that aha moment has been neat to witness, but also like I see that fairly often where people near the end of their counseling are like, you know what, this was really helpful, and sometimes the clients don't really think it will work at the beginning. And it's neat when they actually experience, as I said early on, that magic of the therapy and that it actually has brought them to a healthier place or a better place than they were originally.
I personally have experienced the aha moment in counseling many times where it's just like, that's why. Oh, interesting. That's why I feel that emotion in this type of experience. So it's been a huge breakthrough in how I see things. And just to follow up on that, I mean, obviously therapy is highly personal or it's personalized, I should say, for each client. It's also very personal for every client as well, obviously. Yeah. What are some of the ways that you adapt therapy to suit every client's different unique approaches to what maybe they're looking for support in?
Well, I like to receive as much feedback in the process as possible. And I think that really helps me to personalize counseling to each individual, because you're right. I mean, previously I've said anxiety is a common concern, but the thing is my 3:00 client experiencing anxiety in this way could be night and day from how my 4:00 client experiences anxiety, right? They might have the same quote unquote concern, but they're going to be so different, right? Yeah. And so initially, when I start working with clients, I do what's called goal setting, and I may not necessarily use that term in the session. Sometimes I might, depends on the person and again, how it is feeling and what's personalized to each of them. But basically, we look at what they want to see different in their lives and how we want to get there. So that's how I personalize it to start with. But then regular check-ins throughout to see if the interventions are working for them, if they're seeing any changes regularly. And by regularly, like, maybe every 5 sessions or so, I'm going back to those first goals. Especially if it's not obvious in the work that we're doing, but we're going back to the initial goals and checking in and seeing if we need, like, how we've done for each of them, if we need to change anything. And I think it's my job as a therapist to stay flexible. Like I have also mentioned before, a lot of times we're trained in lots of different modalities and lots of different approaches. And so I think, as we work with a person, if it's not necessarily being helpful to them, the work that we're doing, that can happen because sometimes it's a bit of trial and error, but it's my job as a therapist to be able to pivot and to make the work more focused on the client's needs at that point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You brought up a question as you were talking. One thing I noticed when I was in high school or grade school, my classes were very regimented. My teachers were taking me on the journey. Then when I went into post-secondary and then all the courses I've taken afterwards, it's the complete opposite. I'm expected to really make sure that I'm doing all the necessary things. They're there for me, the lecturers. I guess when it comes to therapy, what's the approach? Do I expect you to lead me down a certain route? Or, do I need to really communicate that to you?
I just feel like the answer to that is a bit of like maybe a both and. And I think it's probably most effective if both parties are making sure that it's working the direction, I guess, becoming helpful for the client, right? And so partly because I can only tell so much from my position as to whether these things are helping a person in their day-to-day, right? And so I will do what I can to be checking in, to be making sure of that. However, if for whatever reason, like a client isn't giving me feedback in return, isn't answering the questions or even answering them honestly, like I don't need it's good because I want my ego stroked. I definitely don't need that. I would really value honest feedback. Like, this part worked, but then at this stage in the process,
What was going on?
And it didn't work, right? So that's where I get helpful information that helps me to change and pivot accordingly, right? So I think in this setting, it is the work. Like ideally, both people would come together and kind of each be able to provide some feedback to see if this is being like personalized appropriately to the client and if it's helping them.
That's really helpful to understand. I guess a follow-up question to that is, what are a couple things that the client can do to maximize the benefits of therapy or counseling?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, being able to provide some honesty and some feedback. And ideally, like hopefully the counselor is asking for, right? And so as I kind of joked about and mentioned, but like it would be helpful if they're asking, how did this go? Or are you finding it helpful? That if you're, for example, not, that you're honest about it. And it doesn't need to be like, you don't need to feel awkward about that or badly about that. It just really provides helpful and useful information. So I think those small bits of honesty to help kind of direct things that can help maximize the work. I think also working counseling is not really very effective if a person approaches it from a passive perspective where they are expecting stuff to just happen to them. The work that we do is often going to, at a minimum, require some pretty intense reflection, if not like quite a bit more active participation to implement stuff. And by stuff, I mean homework, intervention, techniques, different ways of thinking, right? Could be so many different things, but it's going to be maximized, most effective if the client will actually be an active participant. And so I think that's also something to keep in mind as well.
I'm going to ask a cynical question.
Sure.
But Elisa, that's just so much work and it's painful. Why would you want that? Why can't you just tell me what to do? Why can't you just tell me what I need to fix?
I wish it was that simple, right? I wish it were
I wish it was that simple too.
And I think the reason why it can be like that, though, is because the client's experience is so important to the work that we do. Because really, like, I come into my counseling work believing that we are both experts, right? I'm not the only expert in the room. And again, I can't do much if the person across from me isn't feeding me at least something, right? And sometimes it is a bit of trial and error. Like we will try something and it may not work. As I have been saying here, that reason why it didn't work is valuable information. And so I think that, yes, it can be a lot of work and therapy can at times be a bit exhausting. But I think the benefit at the end of it is what makes that difficulty in the moment of the counseling session worthwhile. Because a lot of times, if you can kind of keep through it, push through when it's difficult, then you can start to see breakthroughs in the area that you're seeking help with. So, and I think your therapist doesn't know it know all of that because, again, because it is so personalized, interventions are not really one size fits all. We oftentimes will take something and we will make it individualized or personalized to each person. And so that's why we can't just kind of give one thing and the client doesn't have to do anything, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, that was a cynical question. You answered it exactly how you should, right? The reality is it's both parties working together. A subtle analogy. I remember when I was relatively young, I was maybe 16, 17, and I was going to the gym for the first few times. And I'd pick up the dumbbells and I'd be flinging the dumbbells around. And I really didn't feel any real pain in my biceps, but I was hurting all over. And I had a coach who just was there and he came over. He's like, "Hey, I'm not going to officially coach you. I know you don't want to pay for it, but walk your elbow into your side and just isolate that bicep." And he didn't do any work for me. He gave me some guidance, but he actually really helped me really figure out how to work that muscle I was trying to work. I still had to do the work to grow the muscle that I wanted, but it was just that coach. And I see counseling the experience I've experienced in counseling has been, there's just those things of like, "Hey, have you thought about this?" Oh, actually, that's so much more practical. And one of my last questions I have for you is, what's something about being a therapist that most people don't realize or would find surprising?
There's probably a few things. The one that comes to mind is that I think it might be surprising for people to know how incredibly privileged therapists feel to do the work that they do. And I have seen that in my own experience, but also with the therapists that I supervise and train. There's often a lot of discussion in this area. And, I think sometimes people might feel like it's a day job, you come to work and you talk to people and you go home. And I mean, there is that aspect to it, but I think that there is a privilege and often a very heavy burden that comes from being a therapist. But it is so truly amazing to be trusted enough by oftentimes strangers to sit and to hold some of life's most difficult or darkest moments with that person and to kind of help them in those moments. Maybe they have some pretty heavy admissions that they're sharing, or there's tears and pain. Sometimes though it's the opposite and it's great moments of joy and triumph, or it could be across a span of sessions. It could be all of that. But I think we just are often awed and amazed that we get to spend time with people who share that with us and trust us with that. And we just love to get to witness the changes that we see in our clients over time. So it is a great privilege. And that's definitely something that is not lost on your therapist.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I appreciate that. One of the things I've really enjoyed about this opportunity to connect with you, Elisa, is that this in a lot of ways is what counseling would be like with you. You're probably going to be in that room when you're connecting with people. You'll see the clock on the back of the wall, that cool artwork. But I guess the one last question I have for you is, if you could change just one thing about how culture, society views therapy, what would it be and why?
I would say, I think if I could change society's perspective on therapy, it would be, it's not like I've ever heard anyone say this, but from years of working with people coming in with limited insurance plans and difficulty in that areas, I think society does not necessarily view therapy as being worth the investment. And I find that really difficult. And I really do feel for so many people who, and their insurance plans cover 2 sessions and that's it. And I just feel so bad. And I wish there was a difference in how that was viewed, and that maybe therapy could be held in the same perspective as healthcare and dental care and those things that we often will see as necessities. Because I think really therapy is an investment in one's own future, really your own health. It's not even your future, it's the current and future. And so it would be just nice for that to be, I think, reiterated in the fabric of society, just that is something that, is held in a high regard, right? So I think that is a difficult thing, and it's hard, but that will change. And then also sometimes, people come in and it's our company just supports mental health, and here's how, and sometimes it's out there. but it's definitely not a widespread perspective yet. So I just look forward to that maybe continuing to change over time.
That's a great observation. I think a lot of times, I think the phrase you used was, we just don't see the value, the financial value. I remember there was one 50-minute session that cost me $200, and the revelation and the wisdom that I was able to bring out of myself through the questions that was answered saved me at least $10,000 right there. So, that was good value for money. But then there is the practical reality that there is limited benefits, or maybe you don't have benefits. And here at Masters, we do have therapists that offer at a lower rate depending on their credentials. So we can definitely serve you in that. Elisa, I just want to thank you for your time today. It has been such a privilege to get a glimpse into what a therapy session with you would look like. If you would like to connect with Elisa and chat with her about some of the different topics or work through some of the things, you can reach out to us here at Masters Counseling, or you can reach us at www.masterscounseling.com. Thank you so much for your time today, Elisa.
Thank you.